A phone rings on a Tuesday morning in February, and the man who answers it already had the best season of his career 4 months earlier. 14 wins, 2 losses, the best regular season record in the entire league that year, and he's about to lose his job anyway. If that sounds impossible to you, stay with me, because it happens more than you think, and it's probably happened near you already, in a much smaller, much quieter version. A version with no cameras, no headlines, just a closed office door and a decision that had already been made before you walked in. This is the kind of pattern that repeats itself in every office, in every industry, in every decade. The unwritten rule nobody puts in the handbook, the one that says results are not the same thing as safety. Here's what's actually at stake for you. You can be the best performer in the room and still be the first one shown the door if the wrong story about you has been building in the background while you were busy being excellent. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how that story gets written, and more importantly, how to make sure it's not being written about you right now, today, in a meeting you weren't even invited to. I'm going to walk you through exactly how this works. We'll build the picture together, piece by piece, and toward the end, I'll show you the one shift in thinking that flips this entirely in your favor. Not a trick, not a script, a different way of reading the room that most people never get taught. So here's the real question underneath all of this. Why do genuinely talented people, people who produce real, measurable results, sometimes vanish from a company anyway? Not because they failed, because something else failed first. Somewhere you weren't looking, somewhere the scoreboard doesn't reach. Most people assume power at work runs on output. Hit your numbers, ship the project, win the season, and you're safe. That assumption feels obvious. It feels almost too obvious to question. It also happens to be wrong, and it's wrong in a way that quietly costs people their careers, one relationship at a time, over months and years, without a single dramatic moment to point to. Here's the dangerous part. Power doesn't run on what you produce. It runs on what people say about you when you're not in the room. That's it. That's the whole engine underneath almost everything that happens to a career, good or bad. Your output builds a case for you, but it's the story, the one your boss tells their boss, the one your peers repeat at lunch, the one that survives long after the meeting ends, that decides whether the case ever gets heard at all. Pay attention now, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. You could be reading this exact dynamic wrong at your own job today. You might be the one quietly rewriting someone else's story without realizing it. The one who repeats a slightly unflattering version of a coworker's mistake. The one whose silence in a meeting reads as agreement with a story you never actually agreed with. And on the other side of it, someone else might be doing the same thing to you right now. And you wouldn't know it until the room had already made up its mind without you. Before we go further, if any of this is already landing for you, go ahead and tap that like button now. It genuinely helps this reach more people who need to hear it before it happens to them, not after. Let's make this real. Let's watch it happen to someone whose results were, by any measure, undeniable. For 5 seasons, a professional football coach ran one franchise. He'd been hired to fix a losing team, and he did, steadily, methodically, year over year, building something that actually worked. By his final season there, his team had the best regular season record in the entire league. 14 wins, 2 losses. The kind of season most coaches spend an entire career chasing and never reach. Here's the cliffhanger, though. That season is also the last one he ever coached for that team. Picture the locker room after that final playoff loss. Players who'd just finished the best regular season of their careers, sitting quietly, half expecting a pep talk about next year. Nobody in that room, including the coach himself, had any idea he'd already coached his last game there. That's how quietly these things actually move. There's no dramatic confrontation you can point to, no single blow-up that explains it. Just a decision made somewhere else by someone who'd stopped seeing the wins as the whole picture a long time ago. Rewind a couple of years before that record-breaking run. The coach and the team's general manager, the man in charge of building the roster, had a relationship that started functional and slowly rotted. Small disagreements over which players to keep, who got credit for personnel decisions, whose voice mattered more in the draft room. None of it was explosive. None of it made headlines in the moment. It just accumulated the way resentment does when nobody stops to clear it out. By a certain point, the general manager had started making major roster decisions without even looping the coach in. Sit with that for a second. The person responsible for putting players on the field was being left out of decisions about which players would be on the field. That's not a disagreement anymore. That's a story already being written. A story where the coach's judgment doesn't count, whether or not his results say otherwise. And here's the part almost nobody clocks in the moment it's happening. The two of them eventually stopped speaking to each other directly. Not fired in a meeting, stopped talking. Actually stopped, for months, communicating through other people, through staff, through anyone except each other. In a workplace, when two people who need to coordinate closely simply stop talking, the silence itself becomes the story. It doesn't need an explanation. Everyone around them fills in the blanks on their own, and usually not in your favor. This is where the what's happening in the other person's head layer matters, because it's easy to just say the general manager was being unreasonable and stop there.
What?
He probably wasn't sitting in his office twirling a mustache. From his seat, he likely felt disrespected, sidelined in his own department, forced to defend decisions to a coach who acted like results made him untouchable. People rarely think of themselves as the villain in their own story. They think they're protecting something. And when someone feels like they're protecting themselves, they don't need to be malicious to turn on you. They just need to feel unsafe around you, and the rest happens on its own. Most people lose right here, not in the big blow-up, but in the slow drift nobody names out loud. The coach kept doing his job the way he always had, coaching hard, winning games, trusting that the scoreboard would speak for him. What he didn't do was manage the relationship that had the actual power to end his career. He assumed the results were the argument. They weren't. The relationship was the argument, and he'd already lost it, long before that final, spectacular season even started. So the team wins 14 games, best regular season record in franchise history, and within days of a disappointing playoff exit, the team's owner, watching a general manager and a head coach who could barely stand to be in the same room, made his decision. Not based on the season, based on the relationship. He described the situation between them as unworkable, and he let the coach go. The best regular season of the man's career became the closing chapter of his job there, not because of anything that showed up in the win column, but because of everything that had been quietly rotting for 2 years beneath it. That's the invisible consequence. Nobody wrote poor relationship management on a scoreboard. Nobody put it in a headline next to the 14 wins. From the outside, it looked shocking. A coach fired right after his best year. From the inside, everyone close to the situation had seen it coming for months. The damage was already done long before the firing was ever announced. It just took that long to show up where people outside the building could see it. Here's the part that should genuinely worry you a little, in a useful way. This isn't a story about football. It's a story about what happens anytime someone stops managing a relationship because they assume their results are managing it for them. That gap between how good your work actually is and how safe people upstream of you believe you are is exactly where careers quietly end. And most people never see it coming because nothing about their day-to-day work changes right up until the moment it's over. Think about how that looks outside of a stadium, in your own office, on an ordinary Tuesday. It's the project you delivered early that never actually got mentioned in the meeting where credit was handed out because you weren't in the room and nobody thought to bring it up for you. It's the manager who inherited you from someone else's team, who never had a real conversation with you about what you're good at, who's quietly building an opinion of you out of second-hand comments and a handful of Slack messages. None of that shows up on a performance review. All of it shapes what happens the next time budgets get cut and someone has to make a list. And we're getting close to the part I promised you. The shift that actually protects you from ending up in that same position. Think about someone in your own workplace right now who you'd call the best performer. Are they also the person managing how they're perceived by the people who actually decide their future? Or are they, like that coach, quietly assuming the numbers will do the talking for them? Because here's the uncomfortable mirror in this. You might be doing exactly that right now, coasting on your output, assuming your manager's manager already has an accurate picture of your value. And on the flip side, someone above you might already be forming a story about you based on second-hand impressions that has nothing to do with your actual work. And you'd have no way of knowing until it was already decided. If any part of that sounds familiar, just type yes below. It'll take you 2 seconds, and it'll tell you something about how many people are sitting with this exact same blind spot right now, at this exact moment, without realizing it. Let's slow down here for a second, because this next part is the actual point of everything we just walked through. The lesson isn't be political or play games. That's the shallow version, and it misses what's really going on underneath. The real lesson is that your reputation is being built whether you're managing it or not. Silence doesn't protect you from that. Results don't override it. The only question is whether you're an active participant in the story being told about you, or whether you're leaving that story entirely in other people's hands and hoping it comes out favorable. So here's how you actually apply this, starting with the way you think about your own position at work, not just the way you act in it. First, stop treating your output as self-explanatory. Nobody upstream of you experiences your work the way you do. They experience a summary, a second-hand account, a 2-sentence version relayed by someone else in a meeting you weren't even in the room for. If you're not actively shaping that summary, through short updates, through visibility in the right rooms, through simply making sure the right people understand what you actually did and why it mattered, someone else is shaping it for you, and they might not even mean to get it wrong. This isn't about broadcasting yourself constantly. It's about making sure the version of you that travels without you in the room is accurate. Second, treat every strained relationship with someone who holds influence over your future as an active risk, not a background annoyance you'll get to eventually. That coach didn't have one bad meeting with his general manager. He had 2 years of accumulating tension that he let sit, because the wins kept coming and the wins felt like enough. They weren't enough. If there's a relationship in your work life right now that's gone quiet, or gone cold, or gone slightly adversarial, that's not something to just ride out and hope resolves itself. That's the exact mechanism that ends careers that look, from the outside, completely secure. Here's the dangerous part again, because it's worth repeating. The longer that tension sits unaddressed, the more it hardens into a settled opinion about who you are. And settled opinions are far harder to undo than fresh disagreements. Third, learn to read the room the same way you'd read a scoreboard. Who's not looping you in anymore? Whose meetings did you used to be part of that you're not part of now? Small shifts in inclusion are usually the earliest, quietest signal that a story about you is already shifting, long before anyone says a word about it out loud, and long before you'd think to ask. Here's a simple version of what that looks like in practice. Say a colleague casually mentions a decision was made in the leadership sync, a meeting you didn't even know existed. That's not nothing, that's data. It's telling you, quietly, that a room now exists where things about your work, maybe even things about you, get decided without your voice in it. Most people let that slide because it feels petty to notice. It isn't petty. It's the single clearest signal you're going to get, and it's usually available weeks or months before anything visible changes. Some historians of workplace behavior suggest this is exactly why so many capable people get blindsided. They're trained to notice performance gaps, but never trained to notice relationship gaps, so the second kind grows completely unchecked until it's already decided something on its own. There's a version of you that catches this early, and a version of you that catches it 2 years too late, the way that coach did. The difference between the two isn't talent. It's not even effort. It's simply whether you've decided ahead of time that a cold meeting or a quiet exclusion is worth noticing the moment it happens, instead of after it's already calcified into someone's settled opinion of who you are. None of this is about deception or games. It's about strategic awareness. Understanding that influence at work isn't just what you do, it's what people believe about what you do, and those two things can drift apart further than you'd ever expect if you're not paying attention on purpose. And here's the urgency of it, plainly. This doesn't wait for a convenient time to become a problem. It compounds quietly in the background while you're focused on the actual work in front of you. And by the time it surfaces, in a reorg, a layoff list, a sudden change in who gets invited to the strategy meeting, there's usually very little you can do about it in the moment. The window to fix a strained relationship or an inaccurate story about you is always earlier than it feels like it needs to be. Waiting until it's visibly a problem means you're already negotiating from a position that's been quietly weakened for months. This is where you have to start thinking differently, not just acting differently. Because the next time you're in a situation like this, and you will be, in some form, at some point, it won't look exactly like a coach and a general manager standing on opposite sides of a locker room. It might look like a strained relationship with a new manager who inherited you instead of hiring you. It might look like a peer who's quietly become the person your boss actually trusts more than they trust you. The specific shape changes every time. The underlying mechanism never does. Position yourself deliberately, or let someone else position you by accident, and live with whatever story they decide to tell. And remember, this cuts both directions, the same way it did earlier. You might be the one holding the influence right now without fully realizing it, the senior voice in the room whose passing comment about a junior colleague quietly becomes that colleague's reputation, whether it was fair or not, whether you meant it that way or not. Read the room means reading your own weight in it too. If people take your offhand opinions and repeat them as settled fact, you're not just a bystander in how stories get built around here. You're one of the people building them, for better or worse. Every time you speak about someone who isn't in the room to correct you, that's not a reason to go silent either. It's a reason to be a little more deliberate about what you say and don't say when someone else's reputation is sitting in your hands, even briefly, even casually, even in a conversation that feels completely unimportant at the time. You've heard the story now. You know how it played out for someone whose talent was never actually the question. Which means you're already ahead of where he was, because you're seeing the pattern before it costs you anything, instead of after. If there's a relationship in your work life right now that you've been quietly ignoring while you focus on your output, you already know which one I mean. You knew before I finished that sentence. That's the one to go fix, and it's easier to fix at week 1 of the strain than at month 24 of it, when the silence has already hardened into something neither of you knows how to break. Here's the one sentence to actually take with you, the whole video in a single line. Outlast the moment by managing the relationship, not just the result. You don't need to overhaul how you work to act on this. You just need to stop assuming the story is taking care of itself. Send the short update nobody asked for. Have the slightly uncomfortable conversation with the person you've been quietly avoiding. Notice which rooms you're no longer in, and ask why before someone else answers that question for you in a way you don't get to hear. None of that requires becoming a different person at work. It just requires treating your reputation as something you actively shape, instead of something that happens to you while you're busy doing good work and hoping that's enough. If this hit close to home, just drop a yes in the comments below. I read every single one, and it genuinely helps me know what to dig into next for you. And if you want the next layer of this, the specific early signals that tell you a story about you has already started shifting before anyone tells you directly, that's coming in the next video, and it's the part most people never learn until it's too late to use it. Subscribe if you want to be there for it, because the next one goes into exactly which small moments to watch for, the ones that look like nothing at the time and turn out to be everything in hindsight. You've got the pattern now. The only question left is whether you use it before you need it or after.